So it looks like we've got a pretty good quorum going on here. So I'm just going to welcome everybody. We are so glad that you could be here with us today. And let's just kick things off, shall we? So thank you for joining us. My name is Erica Kirkland, and I'm the marketing manager here at XPLANE. Today we're talking about how you and your teams can embrace remote life to grow a thriving workplace virtually. But before I introduce our speaker, I just have some basic housekeeping notes that I'd like to review with you all. So like many of you, explainers are working from home these days. So if we experience any technical issues or internet lags, please bear with us. And lastly, we will email the slides, a copy of the webinar recording, and any tools that we mentioned to any of the attendees and registrants within a couple of business days. So please keep an eye out for that email later this week. So with housekeeping out of the way, I'll get back to the business at hand. Today's session will be led by Elizabeth Hinckley, Senior Consultant, whose work focuses on creative organizational change, entrepreneurship, and the art of growing thriving cultures. So without further ado, Elizabeth, please take it away.
Oh, thank you, Erica. Hold on just one second. All right. So as Erica said, I'm Elizabeth. And today, for those of you that don't already know XPLANE, we're a design consultancy focused on change and transformation inside of organizations and getting people aligned and moving forward together. And we've worked with more than a quarter of the Fortune 500, as well as startups, government entities, and nonprofits. In other words, we have a lot of experience in helping organizations navigate the biggest challenges they face. So let's dig into today's topic. And as you were waiting to begin, Erica did a great job of kind of talking through some of the places that we heard. We heard the kitchen, we heard the home office, we heard, saw a mountain house. I definitely saw a laundry room a couple of times. And I don't think I saw anybody saying they were still working from the company office, but it wouldn't be surprising if some of you still were. So as we delve into talking about growing a thriving workplace virtually, we think it's virtually impossible to have a conversation about the workplace without talking about culture too, because culture and environment are inextricably linked, right? And so today we will focus on, first exploring and understanding, then rethinking our ways of working from an environmental perspective, looking at how your workspace and culture functioned in the past, or maybe just a few months ago, and how they work now in COVID times as we work from home primarily, right? And all of this is with the goal of thinking forward to what we will need tomorrow. So for most of today, we're going to use a new set of XPLANE tools, the Future Work Environment Planner, which is a mouthful, I know. And it was created just for this occasion. So let's first establish a baseline for everyone on the call today. And I know, we spent a little bit of time talking about the rooms, but I'd love to just kind of get a summary of where we're all working from. So normally, if you've done our webinars before, you know that we always ask, where are you calling from? At this moment, we want to know the environment you're calling from. So if you could answer the poll, and we'll give you just about 30 seconds, and then we will close the poll. Okay, you want to end the poll? There we go. Well, this is no surprise to anybody, right? Now, come on, somebody has to be calling from a fabulous locale that is neither of the above. I saw some great places in Norway with big windows, but that's probably your home as well. So anyway, this is great and really informative. And so let's move forward. I want you to think about that while there's likely a significant percentage of folks here today who are working from home, we saw a lot of you, and you mentioned this in your comments, you actually had already been doing this before we started this grand pandemic experiment, right? And for many of us, these past months honestly have pushed us a bit to work out of our comfort zone. And for some, it's interesting, we may not want to go back, as is evidence from this New York Times piece from last week. What if you don't want to go back to the office? So of course, working remotely, this is not like a new subject, right? If you think back to even the end of 2019, which does feel a little bit of a long time ago, the truth is, every company was experimenting with a hybrid workplace where the work environment was some mixture of a physical workspace and an online space. And many companies had completely refigured their workspaces to be more open and flexible with hot desks for those remote workers who really only needed to come into the meeting once in a while. So, of course, a few months changed everything. And while we know many are enjoying this new way of working, we've been hearing that there are what I would call mourning. There are people that are mourning that physical environment that allowed us to collaborate and work in community together. Uh, Before a few months ago, a leader's main challenge was to strategically balance the cost and flexibility benefits of a remote worker world with the cultural, psychological, and management benefits of a physical space. And you know what? The thing many didn't talk about, the kind of the secret that was popping up a bit, was that regarding that hybrid environment, it was starting to have effects on the company culture. And these last 2 months have taught us a lot about what works and what doesn't work in that all remote, all the time world. And we're seeing not just some, but the majority of employees experiencing the effects of a loss of culture. For instance, in interviews we conducted, we heard after the Zoom call ends, I feel immediately lonely. We moved to this new way of working so fast, all the physical reminders of our company like swag and posters and even the kitchen where we all met are gone. And I need a reason to have a conversation with someone now. I used to just walk by their desk. And finally, the workday has become never ending because I never leave home. So even as we find ourselves making plans to reopen in the upcoming weeks and months, the old ways of working are probably never going to be the same. Culture and workspace may not be what leadership is tackling first right now, but in the long run, it will be company critical. So let's make a plan for the future we know is coming. Today, we're going to play the role of anthropologist and futurist. And using XPLANE's tools, we're going to determine how you work best in your environment. We're going to identify what makes your culture unique. We're going to conduct user experience research on yourself, your team, and beyond. And we're going to check critical mindsets and actions needed for this new reality. So let's start by putting our anthropologist hats on, right? So what you have in front of you is part of research that was conducted way back in 2013 by Steelcase. And if you know Steelcase, great design company that designs primarily work furniture. And they were grappling with helping organizations build flexible workplaces that could handle the concurrent environments of brick and mortar office space and online virtual workspace. So they interviewed or they surveyed about 30,000 folks over a 4-year period. And what they were measuring for was employee satisfaction, mobility, and collaboration. And that research provided a real telling snapshot of what workers wanted, what they needed, and expected from the workplace. And if you notice on the left column, those basics, including natural light, great view, and air quality, and honestly, those are some things that actually popped up in the comments, those were things that were the basics. The access focused on different ways to work, collaborate, get information, and take a break. And then finally, we had engagement. What was really interesting about this survey, and there's more than what you see here, but employees who felt their workplace basics were done right and had access to people and technology were literally 3 times, that's 3 times more likely to feel their workplace helped them to be engaged. Think about a chain reaction from the organization providing the tools and systems and environment to what the employee experiences in return, to what the employee gives back to the organization, which is a flexible, connected, and motivational workplace, which turns into the employee experiencing community, belonging, and inspiration, which turns into the employee providing that best work self, whether it's live and in person or online. So another way to think about this is to imagine the organization as a living organism. What keeps the organization alive is that symbiotic give and take relationship between leadership, employees, and the organizational environment. Now here you see how each positive action from leadership or the organization creates a multiple level psychological then physical response from the employee, which then circles back to the organization. And you can see that symbiotic relationship in a healthy organization that starts with leadership. If you want a growth culture, these 4 pillars are key, which is a flexible, connected, and motivational workplace, a focused purpose, inspiring vision, resilient plan, clear, transparent communication, and entrepreneurial experimentation. So as we move into the work portion of this webinar, I'd like to get your brain percolating. When we asked people about culture and the current environment we're working in, the answers we got centered quite a bit on those rituals they missed. You know, a great and simple example is the ritual of walking to the kitchen in the morning, grabbing a cup of coffee, and chatting with whomever happens to be there. So, are there any organizational rituals or customs you miss these days? You can include in your answers in the chat section to the right of the screen so we can all see. And when providing a comment, make sure to select all panelists and attendees so all voices are heard. And we'll start looking at the chat.
Sure, happy to. So there's definitely been going for coffee with teammates, a lot of lunch with coworkers, group lunches, morning chats with just colleagues that sit around people. Um, what else? Oh, this is a one that you and I have chatted about is just drive-by conversations. You just happen to be at a desk walking by somebody and strike up a conversation that way. Lunch or tea in the afternoon, going for drinks after work.
That's great. Random conversations, problem solving with close colleagues, bringing baby goats and lambs to visit coworkers. That is random, Sarah. I
Yeah.
love um, um, my commute with audiobooks. Yeah, we can't do the commute as much anymore, can we? There's nowhere to commute to. Rolling my chair to the desk next to me for a chat. Oh, baby's visiting the office. Okay, I'm getting a bit wistful with some of these. My goodness.
Yeah, and
But they're
I
all
think
great.
someone also answered salad day, and I know we've had a couple of those at XPLANE as well, where each contribute potluck style for salad makings.
Yeah, right. Okay, these are great, and it's actually great fodder for this next step. So, um, give me one sec. Okay. So, in the virtual environments we find ourselves working in today, those rituals are really important. You know, back to the metaphor of the organization as organism, when the environment changes, changes must also be made to keep that organism healthy, right? And we realized, Explain realized we needed to think consciously of how we had changed and would continue to change and take some steps to plan a better future to keep our organizational organism, it's a mouthful, living and breathing and well. And so Explain created what we're going to spend a lot of our time on today, which is a 3-stage planning process called the Future Work Environment Planner. The first we're going to do is a historical environmental scan pre-COVID. And then we're going to move into that current state today. And these both inform how we start to plan for the future. So the process is, as you'll see, extensive, and it definitely takes more than the hour that we have, but it's also possible to use parts of it for yourself, your team, or your change management planning. And like I said, today, we're probably going to spend more time with that first and second stage, the historical and the current scan, and we'll use an example. So first off, we're going to be using Mural for this, so I'm going to switch in just a second. But this is the first stage, just so you can get your bearings and how this all works. So quick tour of the planning tools. For the historical environmental scan, we'll put on our anthropologist hats once again, and we're going to tackle 2 worksheets, 9 to 5 spaces and cultural signs and touchstones. And the work here will help us realize 3 things from our past: how we worked and balanced the rest of our lives during the week, the cultural signs and touchstones that connected us to our organizations, and the space we use to make both come alive. Then we're going to go to today, the here and now, and the current way we work in our environment. While we won't work through this exercise together in full, we're going to take you through an example. We're going to actually meet an architect named Rebecca, who helped fill this out with me. We went through this process. And the work here is going to help us realize how we're using the limited spaces we have now for work, as well as the rest of our life. And this will help you actually start to become a virtual space planner. Finally, we're going to leave you with a future environment planner. And this accomplishes a few goals. It asks you to think about what changes you have made in this new environment that are better solutions. And it's going to help you pivot to a more positive mindset. We're going to consider the spaces you use most in both the past and present that should be carried on. And we're going to consider how you bring cultural touchstones into the future space. And finally, how you might plan your perfect future hybrid space. Okay. So let's head to the mural. And if you don't mind, give me a sec while we set this up. And I'm going to go to, everybody should see kind of a cool screen that I'm going to make a little smaller right now. So if you're not familiar with Mural, we love Mural. Mural is this wonderful collaboration tool. And what I'm going to ask, well, we're going to move this, through this relatively quickly. If you would like, because I find I'm kind of a learner who needs physical things in my hands. So if you'd like, get a pen, get some Post-its or just a piece of paper, get it in front of you, and you can kind of answer these as you go along, and it will help you kind of imprint in your memory what we're talking about. And again, this is Mural. So what you're looking at right now, I'm kind of showing you, give you a little
Elizabeth,
bit of,
we
yeah.
we still see your PowerPoint, just as a heads up.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry, guys. Hold on. Okay. Can you see it now?
There we go.
Okay. Sorry, guys. Okay. So now this should look familiar because this is what you were just looking at from the previous screens. And again, this is Mural. So while if this is something that's interesting to you, with XPLANE, we do a lot of collaborative work with this, as I mentioned. And what I'm showing to you on the left is one kind of cool thing you do is you move stickies over to the screen, and you can move things around and collaborate together. Today, I'll just kind of be taking you through this example with Rebecca the architect. But what I want to show you is, just moving through this, kind of that this is basically those 3 worksheets all together, right? So I'm gonna actually zoom in on one part of this. And this first stage is called what we call 9 to 5 spaces, and then cultural signs and touchstones. And if you remember, this is from the historical section that we started first. So, and I will make this bigger so you can read it, but what we wanted to do is think about an activity tree. And what we asked Rebecca is, first, to begin tackling the 9 to 5 worksheet. We asked Rebecca to look at her work week on a calendar pre-COVID. And we wanted her to focus on the work hours only. So for her, that was about, I'd say 9 to 7 p.m. was her work time. And we asked her to think of work-specific activities she does at work, non-work activities she does at work, and then the rest of her life. And I'll explain what that means in a minute. So what that looks like in terms of the decision tree is, in the green bubble you see, was your activity work-related? Was your activity non-work related but happened at work? And was your activity the rest of your life? And we all know that even though we have these, these work days, there are other things that we accomplish, like picking up kids, going for a run, all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. And we're going to focus on the work-related part first. So we wanted to kind of dive into this even a little bit further. And the questions we asked were, we wanted to understand if Rebecca did things alone, individually already, or if she did things in a group. And you can imagine where this is going. That really helps with how we use space, right? So then we went one more step and asked her, was it more of an informal kind of informal kind of meeting, or more of a formal meeting or presentation? And when we followed the decision grid, this is kind of how she answered, and I'll make this bigger. So for Rebecca as an architect, the individual work that she did, she uses a program called Revit for planning. And so when she's at her workstation, she's doing that work. And again, this is not exhaustive in Rebecca's day, but this is one example. We asked her also what space she utilized. So if you see in 1C, she uses her individual workstation. Then when she was thinking about, well, in the group activities that I do, the more informal ones, like I might brainstorm with another team member, or I might have a phone call with a consultant. And in those spaces, she was using, again, her individual workstation in the huddle room and probably her computer screen. And then finally, and again, this is in her architectural office, what she would do with more meetings or presentations as an architect, all staff meetings, WebEx meetings, presentations. I mean, she is in the healthcare industry, so she did a lot of presentations to hospitals when she was building hospitals. And those rooms that were used was the conference room and the individual workstation. So obviously, like I said, we wanted to move into the other parts of the day that maybe happened at work but weren't work related. Because if you want, if you want a work environment that kind of takes care of all your needs, we're not working all the time, right? So we asked her again something. What did she do alone? What did she do with others? For her, at her architectural office, individually, she would take coffee breaks, and she would also do a meditation. And those rooms that she used were the meditation room in the kitchen. When she was doing things with others, she would do lunch and learn or lunch with coworkers. She might even go to a design workshop. In her world, those were things that were not actually working. They were learning activities, but they weren't part of the work. But they did happen at work. So they were happening in the conference room, the front lobby, maybe even the cafe. And then what she really liked about the breakup of her day was she would take a run break during lunch, or she'd maybe even go and have lunch with her boyfriend. So she really set some time to take a couple of breaks throughout the day and have that one long hour in the middle. And so she'd go to the local running trail, or she'd just go outside of the office, or she'd go to an offsite restaurant, right? So that kind of gives you a breakdown of the decision tree. But that's not all. We can talk about the workday and how we use it, but we all know, because there's a lot of people on this call today who are really focused on culture. The culture part of it is as important in the environment, thinking about how that makes working the work life better, right? So this exercise that's really great, cultural signs and touchstones, I highly recommend. It definitely takes more than the maybe 10 minutes we'll spend today on it, but it is a wonderful tool these days to be using with your team members in a virtual space, to talk to them about, as we asked you, the rituals that maybe you miss. And also you're kind of moving to the point of how can you reinvent those for the virtual world, or in the future when it becomes back to a hybrid space, but maybe it's a little bit of a different mix. So um, the way this breaks up, and again, great for team conversation, is we think about the cultural signs and touchstones. So those might be artifacts, which are tools or physical objects that tell us something about our culture. Rituals and customs, which are repeated processes in a prescribed order that can show capability of the people. Heroes and legends, which are myths, stories, and people that transmit that culture. And then values and beliefs, standards and tenets for discerning what is good or what people hold true in that culture. Sayings and languages, words and verbal patterns we use to quickly communicate. And then brand touchstones, which are the symbols and markers that represent and summarize our organization to the world and to ourselves. So in Rebecca's world, again, architect, the way the architecture office was set up, they really like to display the work on monitors, on posters, using models of past projects. And so those were the artifacts that would show up throughout the office. Also, other artifacts were just the tools they used, the architectural tools. Rituals and customs, there were some formal ones, and we all have these, like the all-staff meeting, the lunch and learns, the monthly meetings, but then also the informal ones, like the coffee in the kitchen. And just as a side note, this kitchen concept is probably the kitchen has something that has come up over and over again in our conversations. The kitchen is not necessarily just where we go for food or where we go for coffee. Not surprisingly, it's where we go to connect with people, right? It's where we go to be at work, but not to work. And thinking about how you reinvent this in this virtual world is something that actually XPLANE has been thinking of. One of our colleagues, I know she's actually on this call today, we were talking about how much we missed the kitchen. And so what we wanted to do, what we really realized was we wanted to find a place where we could be at work but not work. And we wanted to see other people in that space. So we can put this kind of in the notes when we send them out to you. There are some really cool applications and programs that you can actually, I could say to Deanna, who's on this call also, hey, Deanna, I'm going to take a break. Let's go to the virtual kitchen. And Deanna and I could hang out in the virtual kitchen, not doing any work, but being at work in our virtual homes as well. I don't know, it gets kind of meta at that point. But starting to really kind of, enjoy the culture part of that as well and extend that to this other environment. And so then finally, heroes and legends for the architectural world. In this case, it was the original owners. And in this particular company's case, a project called the Bridge Project, and I'm using quotes for that, which was legendary or maybe just certainly remembered. For her values and beliefs, the net zero, important thing in her world, quality design, human experience, and they have something called in their values and beliefs called We Believe, and they're the tenets of architecture, but they're the tenets of human design as well. A lot of jargon in the architecture world, so things like CBC, which I don't know what that is, and OSHPD, they mean a lot. That word synergy that we probably all use in all of our cultures. And then finally, our brand touchstones. For them, the color orange was important, the web page, and HOK signage, her company's HOK. So as we did in the previous exercise, what we wanted to know was, and maybe it's not always translatable, but how some of those cultural ideas might be translated to the physical space or to the space with senses, the spaces that use your senses, like the kitchen, for instance. So in her case, a lot of things that came up a lot were lobby, back wall, kitchen, conference room, her computer screen, and I'm skimming through this pretty quickly. What we asked her to do next, and if you see these little tiny light bulbs, is kind of, and if you're familiar with XPLANE's methods, we always like to kind of whittle things down a little bit to kind of get the great nuggets that keep coming up time and time again. For Rebecca, individual workstation came up a lot, huddle room, conference room, meditation room. And I hope I'm not making everybody dizzy. I probably am a little bit, but we're going to move to the here and now work environment. And remember, this is the current space. So this is what we're in right now. Everybody is experiencing this as we speak. And what we asked her to do first in what you see as 3A is carry over those spaces that she was still needing to use in the virtual world. In her case, they were the huddle room, the individual workstation, the kitchen, the computer screen, and also the running trail. She wanted to figure out, she still felt like she needed to exercise. She still felt like she needed a break room. So what we asked her to do is translate those spaces to how she was using them now. And in her case, her home desk and her bedroom, which for a couple of people on the line, I know we saw bedroom quite a bit, became her huddle room, her individual workstation, and her meeting room. Her kitchen continued to be her kitchen, but just her kitchen in her home. She uses an outside table on her deck, and that also became the break room for her. Computer screen was the same, and because she's living at home, her neighborhood became her running trail. So what we asked her to do, and what we like to do is for your individual work in the planner, we want you to be aware of how you work, who you work with, and where you work, along with the other parts of the day. But we also want you to think about how you use these spaces. It's easy to put these things on a Post-it, but really kind of processing why you do it, what works about it, what maybe needs improvement is a great part of this process. So I don't know if this is going to be a surprise for everybody, but for Rebecca, her home desk bedroom, the reason she was using it is because it has power outlets. I just think that's really funny. Honestly, it was the only space that kind of fit. She has a 1-bedroom apartment in Culver City, California, and there just was not another place to be able to put all her stuff that had power outlets. She pointedly said that nothing works about it. And I'm laughing because I just think that's so funny. Nothing works about the space right now, but it's what's working right now. And what needs improvement as an architect, it's non-ergonomic. There's only one monitor. It's not air conditioned, and it's small space. And I'm sorry, I'm just giggling a little bit because I know Rebecca, and it just makes me laugh thinking of her in this 1-bedroom. So anyway, her kitchen, why is she using that room? Well, she needs somewhere to prepare her food. What works about it? Well, she actually has better coffee at home than at the office. I guess that's a perk. And she can eat with her cat. What needs improvement? Well, at her office, her coffee is free. It is not free at her home. And there's no social interaction in her 1-bedroom apartment. In her outside table, she was using that as a stimulation and a break room from work. And I think she, we don't have what works about it. I think she actually liked that it was outside, but she also missed the human interaction. Um, and you can kind of see where this is going. The computer screen, it links to the work in the company. That neighborhood provided that exercise. What we asked her to do next is start to plan that space. And it was very easy for her to think about the dedicated workspace. But if you remember in that first exercise we went through in the past, we asked you about the non-work at workspace and the rest of your life. And in these worlds where we're spending time in our laundry room doing our work, all of our work, we need to be able to think about how we break up the day and how we use that day to not just accomplish work. It's still important now, even if we feel like our day begins at 7 and ends at midnight. And some of you do feel that way. So for Rebecca, in her dedicated workspace, she's still using that home desk bedroom, and it's still being used for informal group work, formal group work, and individual work. That didn't change. And in the yellow stickies, we don't necessarily need to go over those, but those were the different programs that she was using. What she struggled with a little bit, but then when we talked about it, it became kind of clear, was that she was using that not work at work. She was using the kitchen and the outside table to do that. So just going into another room or outside helped. And then obviously the rest of life, she was using that neighborhood. So this is a great exercise. It sounds simple, but being able to spatially think about how you use the spaces that you have right now and how you separate that workday is very helpful in feeling, I find relief in this exercise because I can kind of break up how I think about things and not feel like everything's happening. Even if it is all happening in the kitchen table, I'm accomplishing all of these different things that I would. I feel connected to that past work, right? So what we found was, it's funny when we were doing, we did a lot of prototyping of this project, and what we were finding is that there was we went through those first exercises that we just went, the past and the current, and as we were kind of seeing when we were talking about the rituals, people were feeling very wistful, and they were like, "Is this ever going to end? Are we ever going to be able to go back to what we enjoyed about the past?" And what we started to think about was, we really wanted to consider that while yes, we had a lot of adaptations that we were having to make, there were some positives that were coming out of this exchange. So in looking at how we plan for the future, this part of the exercise is really more of gathering your field notes and planning ahead. And the field notes are using you are the user right now. You are experiencing what you miss and what's working right now in this virtual world. And you can create that future environment, because we all know it's still going to be hybrid, as we talked about at the beginning, mashing those up to make the best space for you. So in Rebecca's case, at first she really didn't, she really struggled with, what were the happy adaptations. But when we talked about it a bit more, she realized that one thing that really worked well with the virtual space was she had equanimity in FaceTime. Junior and senior staff had equal platforms. They were finally daily team check-ins. We've all become much more purposeful with checking in. One of the things that we found at XPLANE and we found with other organizations is we have to be more purposeful and communicate even more with each other, which the benefit of that is that we're connecting more with each other. Team members more likely to be invited to discussions because we want to keep on top of things. And there's more interaction between internal team subgroups for cross-pollination because we don't have that being able to walk to someone's desk, right? Interestingly, I also did this with the executive director of a small orchestra. And if you can think about, like with sports and live performance, they're struggling right now. He's trying to figure out how they will be able to ever, put those orchestra members on the stage again, but then be able to actually perform in front of an audience. But one silver lining that's popped up in this is he started to recognize that the specific work that his orchestra does, which is really more new music, that there were other not-for-profits that were doing similar things. And as he started to talk to his colleagues, he recognized that maybe the future of what they were doing was not necessarily a bunch of these different not-for-profits doing similar things, but actually joining together and bringing in a number of donors who cared about this work and maybe collectively joining as an organization. And there were a number of things that kind of came up as we actually talked about it. And that's as important as anything is talking about what actually are the happy, positive things that are happening with these adaptations we're trying to make. So back to Rebecca super quick. We asked her to, again, process the virtual spaces that she would maintain and the physical workspaces she would maintain. For her, she's okay with that bedroom workspace, but she says it needs some work. She actually likes the idea of using that outdoor table when she works from home as a break. She gets to see her neighbors. And she actually really enjoys the idea of the neighborhood as a way to kind of get away. It's not quite the running trail, but it works for her. For her physical workspaces, again, honestly, again and again, people miss that kitchen. So figuring out how to translate that to the virtual world, if that's what we end up on. She misses the walls of her office. She misses those artifacts that she could see. And she misses the conference rooms. And these rooms are just better for working with clients. And she misses her individual workspace as an architect because it had not only all her tools, but all her monitors and her screens. And she was in that energy in that environment. We asked her also, what cultural touchstones would she call out or maintain? And for her, the website was actually working really well as an artifact. We don't really think of it as a cultural touchstone. We don't necessarily label it that way, but it was something that helped her feel connected. And it's not necessarily just the chat screens or the Zooms, but all the information, the intranet part of it. And then, of course, like I said, she missed the walls. What we found with XPLANE also is XPLANE, because we're such a visual organization, we've been having to kind of think about what are the visual reminders that we need to bring back to our space. Not surprisingly, we have a lot of Post-its and Sharpies. Even if we're doing these virtual sessions like I'm doing now, having those reminders of how we work, those artifacts are really important. So finally, starting to plan that new workspace helps you feel productive. It helps you feel entrepreneurial. So for her, this is just the start of what she did. If she was planning her new space, she would have walls, that neighborhood. Those are the areas that are about the culture and the artifacts, and then also the being at work, but not working, or even just doing other things. That kitchen and that individual workspace. So I'm going to move on out of this screen, and because we are going to have some time for Q&A, and I'm going to stop the share and give me 1 second. I'm going to go back to the previous one. Okay. All right. So if you've been with us for previous webinars or know our tools, you've heard us talk about those 8 dimensions of the organization under the subject of change, and how when you change one dimension, there will likely be, other changes that follow, right? So with the forced changes in our organizations today, we focused on 3 areas of the 8 dimensions that are affected as well. The systems and tools changes that affect the behaviors, and then in turn affect the culture and values. So to close, I'd like to talk about the future mindsets and actions that can be positive for that new work environment. Put simply, if you look at those circles in black, those are the future mindsets, experiences, and ways of working that XPLANE believes will take your organizational culture the furthest in the next stage of change. So first, creating a sense of belonging for your employees. How do you make employees feel connected to the bigger organization? That came up time and time again. My organization and my culture made me feel like I belonged, that I was one of people who are like me. Then showing vulnerability, that's been coming up a lot, we've heard. How do you bring the human side forward in this new work environment? How do you show, like I'm showing you today, certain things about like managing all of these webinars where, I'm a little clunky sometimes, let's be honest, but I'm doing my best. So I'm showing my vulnerability even in this webinar. And demonstrating resilience and modeling it for others. Work like we've done today can really help. And then finally, entrepreneurship. That future space planner is about entrepreneurship. How do you provide the tools so employees can solve challenges themselves, even remotely? How do you help your employees think about their workspace and be conscious of it and create something that actually works for them instead of just getting by? As you can see, the future environment planner, that's one long process in design thinking a new work environment. And those yellow circles in the middle, these 4 ideas, they are all connected and supported by building an environment of safety, trust, and good communication. And they connect to the larger idea of a perpetual growth organization. So remember those 4 pillars that we talked about, the 4 pillars of a growth culture. They're extended out from what the organization provides to what the employee experiences to what they provide in return. And the growth culture pillars will be a topic we get into in future webinars. And I know there's a lot on this screen to look at, but if you notice in the middle, a lot of those words that came up, those mindsets that we want to, when we create that culture in that environment, that physical and that virtual environment, the employee feels those things, and in turn, they give back to the organization, that for entrepreneurship, that proactive, informed decision making, for clear, transparent communication, vulnerability, and trust. For if you have a focused purpose, inspiring vision, and resilient plan, loyalty, support, productive output. And then, of course, hopefully our best work self. So we are going to do a Q&A, but we're really thrilled to be sharing our approach with you, and we hope you find it useful in your own work. And in terms of next steps, as Erica mentioned at the beginning of this, we'll send copies of the tools and templates we use today out to each of you by email. For more information about our work, our thought leadership, our downloadable tools, please visit our website. And we also have tools, including our card decks, available in the store. And lastly, we love your feedback and ideas. As I mentioned, this is something that we created in the last week, this future planner. So we want to be able to improve it, and we'd love for you to be able to use it. So it may be DIY right now, but there's also a chance that we could do a mural workshop or things like that in the future if you like. So let us know. So without further ado, I think we're going to move on to the Q&A. And Eric, I'm assuming you're still there.
I am still here. Yep. I just didn't want to, distract from the presentation. So.
And Erica, while I can't see my Q&A just yet, so I'm going to ask you to read a couple of questions that you see, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah. For any attendees that have questions, please use the Q&A feature. And also, if you see a question that you like that's been asked, there's the opportunity, there's a little thumbs up symbol that you can use to upvote a question. So we'll just give people a couple minutes to get those entered, and then we'll start answering them for you all.
Sure. So first question, can you share the template of your mural to use it as well? That's a good question, Erica. I'm going to ask you this. One thing that we've been kind of playing with is doing some workshops with the mural. You do have to have you have to be connected to the mural, but we can certainly think about that. We know it's actually very useful to have that. Good question. So Matilda, how do you work on inclusion to make sure that everyone can feel connected depending on digital level? Oh, that's a great question. Well, if you, to the best of my ability, the challenges that we saw, I'm going to answer this in a couple of ways. We saw that people were working in very different environments. And we saw that one thing in terms of inclusion that actually was a happy positive that Rebecca mentioned was that she was finding that actually this virtual work world was requiring people to communicate more and requiring people to think about who they needed to include in those conversations. So I think if you were asking XPLANE, we would say you need to communicate more. So in terms of inclusion, being purposeful, if I was to create maybe one more yellow circle in that last slide that we showed, second to last slide we showed, it would be including everyone in the conversation. And when you think about entrepreneurship, the idea of entrepreneurship, which honestly I think should be its own webinar, that also is inclusion, because that's giving everybody the tools to be able to be part of the solution. So I would also say that if you're using this future workspace planner, instead of just the leadership deciding what they want to do, how can we actually use this as a teamwork approach in terms of having this conversation that we're having right now? I'm kind of just talking right now, but how we're working right now, what's working, what our cultural touchstones are, and then how we're using our environments in that second phase current. And then because we know there's going to be a future, what do we think is the ideal? So having everybody in that conversation. And sorry, that was kind of a long-winded answer. Let's see. How have you found using Mural for workshops with larger groups of people? Does the process break at a certain number of attendees? Great question, Annalise. I'm going to be honest with you. I adore Mural. I really do. I do find that, I'll answer this a couple of ways. When we work with clients, smaller groups are easier because there are things that go faster with mural and things that go a lot slower. People getting used to mural, moving things around, and then processing the information can take a little bit longer. And if everybody here who's, has experienced Zoom, as the person kind of leading the facilitation, it's a lot harder to kind of read body cues and manage what's going on. And in mural, I find that even more challenging because I'm not able to read kind of those social cues. So it becomes a little bit of a free-for-all. So smaller groups I find work best. For larger groups, there are tools in mural that can help you limit how people participate. What I would recommend is do a deep dive into mural, go into their Q&A, and they talk about a lot of that stuff. I might be skipping a couple. What's been your experience in taking actions from the insights this exercise identifies? How did you take the next step? Well, okay, so great question. Well, actually, I know Deanna is on the line. I know she can't speak up, but one thing that's been really cool, I just have found that kitchen comment that I met, we had no idea that some of the physical workspaces that we had just taken for granted, even not just the kitchen, but even the in-between spaces where we would go from a meeting room to our office desks, how important they were. So in the kitchen example, like I said, and we have Nadi on the line as well, we are experimenting with that virtual kitchen and trying that out. And so to be honest with you, we're still in kind of experimental land. We're doing a lot of experimentation, and one of the reasons why this exercise even exists is because we were recognizing that we knew that we were going to have to go back to some kind of hybrid environment. XPLANE recognized that we wanted a physical workspace. We couldn't just all work remotely all the time. So we are working in real time, experimenting with some of those things, and the kitchen would be one of them. Let's see, Cameron, any advice for the introverts who find themselves inundated with over communication? Cameron, such a good question. I feel like my extrovert friends are struggling to get their feelings of importance, but I'm feeling full Zoom fatigue and have more meetings than ever. Oh my goodness. Tell me about it. Well, so we have been finding, the over communication is a challenge, but also the extrovert friends. So I'm going to give an anecdote. So what we have found, and this is sort of answering your question. So what we found with Zoom that is an unfortunate thing that happens is that because I'm a facilitator, it is harder for me to manage the people on the call. And what's really actually happening in Zoom is that we are missing those physical cues, like being able to read eye contact, being able to see hand gestures, or the obvious things. And so before, when we had introverts and extroverts in the room, someone like me or someone who was running the meeting could kind of read those social cues. We don't have that anymore. So a lot of what's happening is we're not sure when we should stop talking, when we should start talking. And what we're finding a lot with folks who, were shy to begin with or were introverts are they're just not saying anything. So we leave these Zoom conversations where some people felt like they talked too much and other people felt like they didn't talk at all. So long story short, one thing that we've been doing is some establishing at the beginning of a Zoom conversation with literally, I don't know if you can see me or not, but literally a visual way to connect with each other. So one exercise we do is we throw an imaginary ball. If you think about it, like, in the Zoom screen, thank you, Erica. So I throw the imaginary ball at you, Erica, you caught it. And Erica will throw it to somebody else and she'll call out their name. Thank you, yes. And when doing that, that actually helps you start to bring in the other parts of the physical part of you into that space. It also makes you aware of all the people on the call. And we do a lot of other exercises, like some ideation exercises in the beginning. One exercise we do is literally a sentence completion where we tell a story with one word. It's an old improv technique. And it also helps us listen more. And everybody has to participate. So that's another part of it. If you have design thinking people who've done a lot of design thinking on the call, that everybody needs to be equal in design thinking. Everybody needs to be heard. So in those early exercises in a Zoom call, even though it feels like repetitive maybe, having some establishing exercises to get people connected is really helpful for the introverts. And that was a very long answer, but I have to say, when the other question about what we're experimenting with, that is something that we've been experimenting a lot with, is how you connect with people at the beginning of the call so everyone feels part of it. What works best? Asking people on an individual level or with groups or of colleagues? Oh, okay, cool. Um, Asking people on an individual level or with groups of colleagues. I don't 100% understand that question. If you're asking about how we did the decision tree and thinking about how we use workspace and how we thought about individual use and work and group use, I will say that that decision tree, I actually created that way back when I was working with UCLA, and they were redesigning their IT department. And they wanted to think about how IT folks used individual space and group space. I translated that to this environment, and what we found is that we needed to be able to think about the workspace in all of those different facets, from individual work time, head down time, to meeting time. And what we've been finding with the way we're working now is that, like in Rebecca's case, she's using the bedroom for everything. So to be honest with you, to answer your question, Matilda, I think it might be as much a mental game, even if you're using that bedroom, as not. But what I also find is I have a couple of rooms in my house, and for meetings, I go into another room, meaning even if it's for my individual time, I have a desk space. And for when I'm in meetings, I might just choose a different room to have a different point of view. For the future planner too. Okay. How can you manage and support the fear and anxiety many have at the thought of returning to office spaces in the culture? Oh boy, good question, Jenny. Yes. Well, I'm going to be very honest. This is one of the reasons why we created this planner, because people are very concerned about going to the office space. And that New York Times piece that I kind of presented earlier, there's a reason why people feel like I could make this work. Some of them enjoy working at home anyway, and have never been given the option to do that, which is kind of an interesting thing to think about in the future, that for remote workers who have been used to working remotely anyway, it wasn't necessarily the thing we were allowed to do. We had to come back into the office and use that hot desk and meet. Now we're figuring out all of these different ways. But the fear and anxiety, I'm a huge proponent of one step at a time. I think if I were giving a recommendation, it would be actually working through this future planner with your team remotely and starting to have them think about all of these steps. And in that conversation, starting to think about what they're worried about. So I might add another step in there about, what are we concerned about if it is the case where you're going to be going back to that office space? I would build in another step. Eric, I'm looking at the time and it's 9:57. I see that there are a lot of questions. Tell me, should we go 3 minutes more, or what should we do?
I'm happy to go longer as long as people don't mind staying on a little bit longer that have these questions that you want to address.
Okay, great. Okay. So Claudia, beautiful, well-organized work and templates. Thank you, Claudia. How do you encourage out-of-the-box brainstorming ideation with this format? Okay. Well, again, I'm going to be just very honest with you. As I have been prototyping this work, what I have found has been the most fabulous part of doing this, and Erica, who's on this call, I did this with her also, is the conversations that came out of it. So for one, even though we went through this ideation template, or this template, what you didn't see is all the good conversation we had. The kitchen aha moment that we had came out of this template. So for one, you should really think about this as a long process, meaning this is not going to take you an hour. This should take you 5 to 6 hours maybe to go through this. And the out-of-the-box brainstorming ideation, what I kind of see this doing is I could kind of see the template being used a couple of ways. One, for individual work, and asking your team to kind of fill it out separately and then come back as groups to kind of what they put together. So what would be interesting is in that second phase where you saw how we kind of divided those 3 areas, I would love to kind of come back to that and talk. First, I'd like to hear about, well, how is everybody using their space? Because to me, that's very fruitful and helps kind of in the brainstorming. In that future planner space, then I'd like to think about, if we, and I would do this through Mural actually, if we were all creating our ideal workspace, first, breaking up those, those 3 areas that we did in the future planner, what are most important to you? And then using dot voting or something to talk about, these are the spaces that we think are most important moving forward, and starting to build that space together. And to be honest with you, I'm using my hands a lot right now. What I could imagine is like working with a client or somebody to kind of help them build that space together. So for me, it's a mural process, and the ideation part of it is kind of hearing what people are saying, hearing their different experiences, putting all of those ideas in one, seeing where the repetition is, and starting to kind of build that space together, with the understanding that individuals will want to use their space and their at work but not working time and the other part of their time in different ways. Has this tool been used across many employees within an organization, and how has that gone? What are the takeaways from leadership? I'm laughing because, as I said, this was originally a version of this was created when I was helping plan an actual physical office environment for UCLA. And so that was about, I think, 500 people. And we were looking at the individual group. We are right now testing a lot of this out. So some of these things that we know have worked right now, that current stage, we're taking in that information. So to answer your question, across many employees, I would say instead of many employees, probably across many different types of organizations. And I will also say that I have not done one of these tests where I haven't had completely different answers. So we've tried to make this planner as slightly generalized so it can take care of a number of different situations. What are the takeaways for leadership on a more macro or organizational level when using these tools organization-wide? To be honest with you, we're still hearing that. We hope that you will test these out for us and give us feedback so we can continue to improve them. Okay, I think we got everybody. We good, Erica?
We're good. Yes.
All right. We went a minute over. I don't have any last parting thoughts, except that I really hope you guys use this and let us know how it works. And again, we'll be sending you this information. So thank you.
Yeah, and I would also like to second Elizabeth's sentiments. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And as she mentioned earlier, this tool has really just been recently used. So as you're using it within your companies and organizations and with your teams, we welcome any feedback that you have for us. So just reply to the email invite you got, or reach out to us through our website. Again, we'd really welcome your feedback so that we can continue to improve and make these function as best for you as we can. Thank you.
Yay.
All right, enjoy the rest of your day, everybody.